Okay, alright, we're back with more Factorio. Here we go. I am Pax, and today we're continuing with some tutorial content looking at the space exploration base. And what I wanted to do today was talk about logistics train networks. So we've been using this mod, logistics train network, which gives you the logistics train stop, and it does a lot of stuff for your trains that you can do that's very, very fancy and has been carrying us throughout the playthrough. But I wanted to start by first going over the more basic logistics train stops to get some principles about how the system works. And so then let's look at then this requester to get a sense of how it works in principle. So basically you can just, when you get the mod, you can build these logistics train stops as a new technology, and they're basically like a regular train station, but they have actually extra pieces. So you can see that I can highlight 3 different things here, and this all comes from one object. So if I put down a new one, you can see there's 3 different things: the input, the output, and the train stop itself. So these all can get wire connections, and here we have the basic requester stop. So I'm using this mod called bulk rail loaders that allows us to just unload and load the trains with a building more easily. So that's part of it. But essentially, when you create a requester, what you have to do is send logistics train network some signals. And so this is what this one combinator here is the primary combinator for the signals. And this is then attached to the LTN input, this lamp, as well as what you wanted to tell the input is, or the LTN network is what's currently available. So you then measure the contents at the train stop as well, and also you're going to put those into the lamp. So what that's going to do with the circuit network is just that the wires will always add together. So the way LTN works is usually when you make a train stop, you're going to put requests as negative numbers and provide values as positive numbers. And so since these 2 wires go to the same place, they will actually just add together in the train stop. And so then there'll be this negative number that goes into the system. And so based on that negative number, the LTN network knows to assign a train to come to the stop and bring whatever cargo it's requesting. And so what's cool about LTN is you can request all sorts of different cargo, but here we just have a station for a single item, and then there are these other signals that you can use to manage the LTN network. Mostly are these stack threshold signals. And so here I have this provide stack threshold. This is just arbitrarily set to very high value so that this station never becomes a provider. It's only a requester. It's not always necessary to have that, but it's a good safeguard. But then the stack threshold is just saying don't request until you need at least 80 stacks. So since our trains have 80 stacks available in our 2 long trains, then the idea here is just to only allow for requests when we have an entire train load. And so this way we'll kind of be servicing the station more in bulk. And so we'll get an entire train to come completely full of copper. Only get us full trains. That's the idea of this request. Then, of course, the train unloads, and one of the main principles of the logistics train station is the requester is always going to load everything in the train. So you just always want it to unload everything. But sometimes the trains can mess up and have stuff you didn't ask for, and it can definitely mess up a lot. So just to make sure that your belts don't get corrupted, often I will put filters between the train storage and the belts, just to make sure that if the train brings something I didn't ask for, it doesn't get onto the belt, which sometimes happens. So just have to watch out for that. That's then the basic idea of the requester. And so then there's a similar idea for the provider, but in this case, we're measuring the contents and we just put it into the stop as usual. And so this, since these are now positive numbers, the LTN network knows that there's some copper being provided here. And if we look again at the combinator sending in the signals to the input, all it has now is just a provide stack threshold. So then again, this is just saying, don't provide to the network until there's at least 40 stacks built up, just to turn the station off or kind of make sure that the station has higher throughput. So that's all the signals going into here. So the provider is pretty simple. But then all this other circuitry is actually just to make sure that the train can get exactly, or at least close to exactly, what the LTN requests. And so basically the other combinator here that's part of the train LTN train stop is the output. And what this will do is when the LTN train arrives, it will output the request that the network has and the amount of copper that the train is asking for. So this will say like copper in some kind of number. And what we're doing then is also measuring the contents on the train. So here we see it come up. So it says it's looking for 2,000 copper. And we're also measuring then the contents of the train here with a station in a normal kind of standard way. So then the contents of the train gets multiplied by -1, and then this gets combined with the value on the LTN requester. And basically then, if anything goes less than 0 in general, so then the amount on the train is greater than the amount in this requester, this will send off this signal to disable the rail loader. So this is just then a signal to turn the rail loader off, so that way you don't entirely need to fill up the train, or since we only asked for 2,000 copper, that's only like half a train load, so the system would turn off early and not completely fill up the train, right? So then the other aspect of LTN is then all the trains can be assigned to any station and carry any cargo, and basically you also have to give it these depot stations. So the trains can go to these depot stations, which you identify using this other signal. So I just have a combinator outputting this signal stop as depot. You plug that into the input, and then the stations all act as depots. Often people will put the refueling with the depot, but you don't have to. I just have the depots scattered kind of everywhere, and I do all the refueling at the provider and requester stations instead. So, but you could also like have the trains get refueled at the depot, which is very common. And then so this gives the trains a place to live, and LTN it actually does a pretty good job of assigning trains that are close by. So it's kind of nice to have the depots spread out all over the place. It makes the system work also a bit better. And then I want to then explain the more sophisticated logistics network and logistics requester system, and also this concept of the base to kind of build out the train network in different modules. And so essentially in this playthrough, I've been creating a bunch of isolated RoboPort networks. So there's essentially isolated networks, like of course the main base is all one big network, but then it's isolated from the tracks around it. And then there's a bunch of networks that are just for the tracks, more or less. So there's some larger networks that are used to build the tracks and expand. But they're also cut off in certain places to be serviced by other stations. And so, and then all the production zones are also cut off from the outside network. So almost every production zone is its own local network. But what happens is every one of these different RoboPort networks is serviced by this RoboPort logistics station. And the intention is to use the LTN system to provide all the buildings and construction material from the main base to build whatever production builds we want to build. So then we're going to bring in all the buildings, all the modules, all the belts through the train network, instead of having bots carry them like a long way away from our main base. We bring them in through the train into a local roboport network, and then the local bots can just have access to whatever buildings they want from the train network and build the buildings. And so here we have a more sophisticated LTN requester, and this time, yeah, we have just a single stack threshold, since this is for logistics buildings. So if anything is asking for more than a stack, we'll ask the LTN network for it. But then we can ask for a bunch of different stuff. So here we by default have just some default stuff of, we want fuel, we want repair packs, we want bots, just to make sure that we can have those things. So this one station also services the fuel, so it will ask for fuel from the network, and then it'll also bring in robots just in case the local network doesn't have any robots. So that will be brought in as well. And then everything else that gets requested is put into these provider chests. And again, the principle of all the LTN requesters is to always unload everything. So these are just blacklist filter inserters to make sure that everything gets unloaded. And so normally you could just ask for buildings. I could ask for whatever, some electric furnaces, put a negative number here, and the LTN network would bring that. And so then I could just build a builder train that has everything, and I would have to, enumerate all the potential types of buildings I would want, like belts and modules as well, and all that stuff. But then there is another mod called the Ghost Scanner that allows us to save a lot of work when we build these buildings. And so technically this is the Ghost Scanner 2 mod that I've been using, which has some performance benefits, but it also has some bugs, but it's been pretty good for the most part. But essentially the Ghost Scanner is also designed to be interfaced with the LTN network, and so if you put down ghosts, this will actually pick them up. So it might take a second or two for it to read, but eventually, yes, it will pick it up and put out a signal saying which ghosts are put down. And then in the mod settings, you can have it invert the outputs and round to stacks. So that way, if you just put down a single ghost or a couple of ghosts, it will still round to the nearest stack. And it's also a negative number, just to be compatible with the LTN network. And so then this will be, any ghost that you put down for any build will be formatted as an LTN request, and then be requested into the network. And so the great thing about LTN is that it can really bring any type of building or handle any type of requests, as long as the station can handle it. And essentially all the requesters just need to always unload everything. Then another aspect of this little logistics station is the recycle network. So there is a normal train stop here as well that I call recycle request, and it is connected to all of the storage boxes that are in one of these isolated logistics networks. So basically anything that the bots pick up, like wood and stone and coal as it's building, and then any buildings we recycle or clean up, then will get replaced into these storage boxes. And essentially, if then there's some arbitrary threshold that I set of just say 100, the recycle train will be requested. So this will activate this train stop, and then there's a special train that will come by and pick up anything in these isolated networks to be recycled and bring them back to the main logistics provider network in the hub. And so here finally we'll go over the hub network and the main provider for the whole system, which is this station here. And basically the idea is, here we have the recycle train. So this is just like a normal train, and if any of these recycle request stations opens up, the train will go get the recycling, bring it back here, and dump it into these storage warehouses. As well as we have the primary requester warehouse here. And so yes, early on in space exploration, we unlocked this requester warehouse by launching some satellites, and we were given one for free. And this was awesome because it allowed us to request all of the buildings from our mall and put them onto the train network. And basically then we can build a single train stop that can service, basically every item in the game, or just arbitrarily many items as we wish, and tell the LTN network to manage it all. So basically the way it works is just you just need to measure the contents of these chests that the trains have access to. So that's going to be all on the green wire. And you can plug that into a single train stop. And now the LTN network knows it has access to all of this material and knows that if it brings trains here, it can request any of the material in this whole system. And then what it does is, so if we look here at the signals, we have a couple of new ones. So here I'm just saying, okay, leave a little bit of stone and wood and coal into the network just in case I want some. So that's just don't worry about that too much. But here we have provide stack threshold. That's one of the signals. So this is just saying, yeah, if we have a single stack of something, we can add it to the provide network. We don't want to request anything. So that's just another flag to make sure we don't accidentally request anything. Then there's actually here provide priority. So we're actually telling LTN that, if this station has, wood or coal or stone from being cleaned up and building, then, pull it out from here first. So this is the provide priority. So this way the recycling gets prioritized over other providers, and, any excess stone will get eaten by the system. But then what you need to do is make these inserters that are kind of smart inserters to make sure that the train gets loaded up with the proper requests. And so again, it's a very similar idea as before, where when the train comes, this combinator outputs the requests that it wants, and the train station is also simultaneously monitoring what's on the train. So then what's on the train then gets subtracted from the requests, and then anything that's positive then can be put into these filter inserters, and these are all set to be set filters. And essentially all of the positive values that come off of this wire will set the filters of the filter inserters. And so even if there's multiple items, the filter inserters will go through all the items at once until the value turns into a negative number or 0. And then they'll switch to the next item and load up more and more items. So here we can see maybe it work a little bit. So yeah, we're getting some landmines. So all the filter inserters turn into landmines for a second, but they're only landmines in this chest. So they came from there and got loaded onto the train, and it was off to probably service one of the walls. But basically then this is how you make a smart station. So you basically tell the LTN all this stuff that it has, then you want to just use the requests and subtract from the contents on the train to set the filters of these filter inserters. And then you can provide pretty much anything you want to in the train network. And I think there's a couple of other places where we made smart stations, right? So I made a second one up here for even more stuff. And basically I think in the car base, we also have smart stations here for providers, so we can provide modules and all the logistics infrastructure by just being able to set the filters appropriately based on the LTN requests. Cool. And then, yeah, we have a couple other train stations for then doing the rocket logistics. So again, mostly been using LTN to manage the cargo rockets as well. And again, here we're just using the combinators to set like tons and tons of requests. And so everything we put up to the space station is just set by these combinators. And so all these negative numbers just ask LTN to bring these materials. And again, we just want to make sure that we compare these requests to the contents of the space station. And so basically there's a satellite over here receiving the contents of the space station. And so that's combined with what's on the rocket and what's in these chests and everything else to make the total sum of like what's going into the space station, right? And then this is being compared to these requests. And so if anything's negative and above the threshold, it will get requested. But then finally, there's also these little flags here. These are basically blockers to make sure that we don't accidentally go haywire. So often, so one thing we don't want to do, right, is when the rocket is in transit, then there's nothing accounting for the contents of the rocket in that time. So there's a little flag here to make sure that the rocket is actually ready to launch before it's going to ask anything from LTN. And that way, like, it has time to, when it's building and going through transit, it has to, it's not accounted for. Because if you didn't have this flag, every time the rocket launched, everything on the rocket would be requested again into the train network. And so you would just get a lot of duplicate requests. So that's one flag. And the other flag is basically saying, like, are we actually connected to the space station? So there's a special signal I'm using to make sure that the communication satellite is intact. Sometimes what happens is the transmitter station will run out of power, and then if it runs out of power, then the contents won't be sent, and then everything in the LTN requester will just be requested again. And so then if the space station runs out of power, the LTN network's going to go crazy, pulling in all the new requests again. So then there's another flag here that just checks to make sure that there is a signal being received, and so the transmitter station is also sending this signal. And so if this decider combinator won't let anything through unless it makes sure that we're connected. So yeah, I think then, yeah, that's kind of the gist of all the LTN stuff that we use for this playthrough. So we have then all these builds that rely on the LTN network and have been built by first building this logistics station and then mostly using these large-scale kind of bulk loaders to manage the inputs and outputs. But you can make pretty sophisticated ones where you ask for, a couple of things sometimes, and ask for multiple things at a single station. That's one of the things you can do with LTN. Or you can again make these smarter stations that can provide multiple things, and so it's very flexible in that sense, and it's very, very useful, especially to manage the cargoes on the rockets and at the different colonies. So again, down here I have a bunch of different rocket stations, all managed with the same kind of idea of just setting the requests on these combinators and communicating with the destination about the supplies, and making sure that the supplies and the requests are always in balance, and making sure that things don't go haywire with some of these flags here. Cool, but then, yes, I think that will do it for today's content. There you go, Factorio. I am Pax. I'll see you in the next video.